Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to break down a seriously dramatic recent court order that is literally wiping multiple Nigerian political parties completely off the map. We're going to look together at this massive intersection of strict constitutional law, harsh political reality, and very real public emotion. Because right now, we are looking at a scenario where the entire existence of a political movement can be erased with just the stroke of a judge's pen. So what actually happens to a political party when it just stops winning? You know, in a lot of democracies, a small political party can exist for decades on the fringes. They might never win a major seat, but they're still participating, they're raising awareness, and their name is on the ballot year after year. But Nigeria? Well, Nigeria operates under a completely different set of rules. Here, just participating is simply not enough. You have to produce actual results. To really wrap our heads around this complex situation, we've got a 5-part roadmap. We'll start with the deregistration order itself, then unpack Section 225A, look at the big precedent set in 2020, weigh perception versus reality, and finally, look at the ultimate decider, the court of policy. All right, let's kick things off with Part 1, the deregistration order, which is honestly a massive judicial shakeup. So here's the deal. A recent court judgment basically ordered the Independent National Electoral Commission, or INEC as we'll be calling them, to completely remove 5 specific parties from the official register. We're talking about the African Democratic Congress, the Accord Party, Action Alliance, Action People's Party, and the Zenith Labor Party. And guys, this court order isn't just a slap on the wrist or a fine. It literally mandates that they be barred from participating in future elections entirely. They're effectively wiped off the upcoming ballots. The lawsuit behind this sweeping change actually roped in the Attorney General of the Federation as a defendant too, and the plaintiffs totally won their argument. They proved to the court that INEC doesn't just have the option to deregister underperforming parties, they have a strict constitutional duty to do it. The core argument was super straightforward. These parties failed to secure any elective office, whether we're talking federal, state, or even local government levels. Which brings us to Part 2, unpacking Section 225A, or what we can call the constitutional threshold. So, what are the actual rules here? Well, the 1999 Constitution lays out these incredibly exact thresholds. You don't have to win the presidency to survive, but you absolutely must achieve at least one of these minimum targets. For example, a party has to secure 25% of the votes cast in at least one state during a presidential election or win one local government in a governorship race. If you can't pull that off, you need to win at least one ward in a chairmanship election or secure just a single seat in the national or state assembly. And honestly, this right here brilliantly illustrates the absolute lowest bar for survival. Out of the entire massive country of Nigeria, with all of its districts and local governments, a political party literally only needs to win a single, solitary councilorship seat to avoid being deregistered. Just one. If a party cannot convince enough voters to grant them even one councilorship seat anywhere in the nation, the Constitution dictates that they forfeit their right to remain a registered party. But as you might guess, here's where things get really messy. The timing is absolutely crucial. Critics are loudly arguing that INEC completely dropped the ball. They're saying INEC shouldn't have waited until these parties were already mobilizing and printing materials for upcoming localized elections like the ones in Austin State. According to the critics, INEC should have reviewed the data and deregistered these non-performing parties immediately after the massive 2023 electoral cycle wrapped up. By waiting, they've essentially created administrative and political chaos right on the doorstep of new elections. Let's move on to Part 3, the precedent of 2020. Because if this sounds completely unprecedented to you, history definitely shows us otherwise. Get this, back in the year 2020, INEC carried out a massive wave of deregistrations. They didn't just remove 5 parties. They wiped out exactly 72 political parties in one fell swoop. 72! And why? For the exact same reason we're talking about today. Those 72 parties completely failed to meet the constitutional thresholds laid out in Section 225A. Let's look at one really fascinating example from that 2020 purge. The story of the National Conscience Party, or NCP, perfectly illustrates this harsh cycle. This party was formed way back in 1994 by the late activist Ganifa Wahimi. In 2003, they fought this massive legal battle just to be allowed on the ballot. And they won. In the presidential election that year, they actually came in 5th place, getting over 161,000 votes. But over the years, that electoral success just dwindled. By 2020, despite all that rich history and their hard-fought legal battles, they were swept away in that wave of 72 parties. All right, let's get into Part 4, perception versus reality.
This is where we hit some serious political friction.
As you can imagine, there is a huge, highly combustible gap here between constitutional facts and the public narrative. On one hand, we have the cold, hard legal reality. These parties just legally failed to win seats, simple as that. But on the other side, an emotional public narrative instantly takes hold, that the government in power is intentionally trying to steal the election and silence any opposition. This quote from the source material really hits the nail on the head regarding the danger of this dynamic. In highly charged political environments, citizens might completely tune out the constitutional logic. You could literally open up the Constitution, point directly to Section 225A, and they might not care. They view the action purely as an attack. The narrative that the big, bad government is afraid of these smaller parties easily overrides the actual reality that these parties couldn't even win a single local councilorship. And the stakes right now are absolutely sky high. The sources note the immense political tension currently gripping the country. We're seeing intense, ongoing debates about major opposition figures, like whether Atiku Abubakar or Peter Obi actually holds the most legitimate opposition influence following the 2023 elections. Now, we aren't taking a side on who the bigger opposition leader is here. What this debate really proves is just how incredibly charged the atmosphere is. When every single move is scrutinized for political advantage, executing a strict legal fact, like deregistering smaller parties, instantly becomes a volatile issue. Which leads us to our final section, Part 5, the Court of Policy. Because these politicians are definitely going to appeal, we have to look at the ultimate decider. To predict how this might all end, we need to wrap our heads around a truly vital concept in Nigerian law. The Nigerian Supreme Court often acts as a court of policy. What does that mean for us? It means that their final binding decisions aren't always based purely on the black and white letters of a specific law. They zoom out. They heavily weigh the broader implications, national security, the mood of the public, and the overall national interest. They're constantly gauging what a ruling will actually do to the stability of the country. We actually saw a perfect example of this recently with the wildly controversial currency redesign issue. A lot of legal experts really did not expect the Supreme Court to assume jurisdiction over the central bank's currency deadlines, but the Supreme Court stepped in anyway. Why? Because state governors were warning of impending chaos. The court prioritized the national interest, security, and preventing potential bloodshed in the streets over strict legal expectations. They made a policy decision to step in for the sake of the nation's stability. So, here's how this legal path is likely going to play out. Step 1. The deregistered parties are absolutely going to appeal this order. Step 2. The Supreme Court takes a look at the strict electoral law, Section 225A, which clearly mandates deregistration. But then comes Step 3. The court has to weigh that strict law against the national security implications, the public's highly emotional narrative of a silenced opposition, and the messy timing of doing this right before localized elections. Finally, in Step 4, they'll issue a final, binding policy decision, one that might uphold the strict letter of the law or might interpret it differently just to maintain the peace. Which leaves us with this final really provocative thought to chew on long after this explainer wraps up. We've seen exactly what the Constitution says, and we've seen how intensely the public reacts. So, in a thriving democracy, should the strict letters of the law dictate who gets to stay on the ballot, or should the mood and emotional validation of the voters ultimately hold sway? It's a massive question, and how Nigeria's highest court answers it is going to shape the future of their elections. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the mechanics of the world around you.